Hello, Garland Nixon here. Let's continue this discussion about the de-industrialization of Europe and the industrialization, if I can ever say the word correctly, of the US. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and I had a great time the other day. I was on the Duran, and I was motivated. Man, what a lot of fun I had with the Alex and Alexes on the Duran, and I had kind of an epiphany going on, and we ran with it, and a lot of people have been asking me about it to chat about it a little bit more. So let's talk about it because one of the issues that I brought up was this. And the discussion of the deindustrialization of Europe has been out there for a while because it's very, very obvious what's going on, right? It's pretty simple. The current European industrialization model, particularly in Germany and Italy and France, are successful because they have cheap Russian energy, right? They can keep their manufacturing costs low. Certainly, labor is going to be higher in the EU because the taxes are high. They have a very high standard of living. They have a very strong social safety net, kind of social democracy things going on over there. So it's very difficult. It would be very difficult for European industry to compete with, Indian, Chinese industry, right? Would be very difficult, but they have a great advantage where China and India get there for the most part. China, they're getting stuff shipped in. They've got a long way to go from getting their oil and, excuse me, and with China, you need a lot of industry, you need a lot of energy, so you've got to source it from multiple sources. So when it all comes down to it, you kind of add it up together, and you're paying a fairly substantial price for energy. Well, even though your labor costs are lower, well, Europe had a great system. They made a deal with Russia, and they could import energy at a low cost because they had a pipeline. And just think about it like this: liquid natural gas (LNG) as opposed to just natural gas that hasn't been processed. Because what a liquid natural gas is, simple as that, it's got natural gas, right? They use, I believe it is liquid nitrogen. You lower the temperature of the liquid nitrogen, of the natural gas so low that it becomes liquefied, and then you have to have special plants to do that. Then you have to have special ships to carry it, right? Very expensive process. And then you have to have special docks to unload it, but you can move the energy around. It's just very, very costly because you have to process it. You can't just pump this gas around, I mean, the basic processing, and then just pump it to wherever through a pipe. If I've got a pipe from my house to your house, once we pay for that infrastructure for that pipe the first time, that gas is just flowing. And if we share the cost, half and half, whatever the case may be, we get together, we build that pipe together, we share the cost. Hey, you don't mind sharing the cost because you're going to be making money for gas for a long time. I don't mind sharing the cost because I'm going to be getting lower price on energy. Boom, we get this gas, we're good. Whereas liquid natural gas is always, you have the infrastructure to create it. But on top of that, you have to maintain that infrastructure. And in fact, you are processing it, right? Then it comes back. And now a lot of people, let me say this. There are a lot of people that think that as liquid nitrogen, natural gas LNG gets moved around the world on a ship, that it's explosive and that it could blow up and it's dangerous. That's actually not the case. Let me tell you, as you've probably heard me discuss many times, when I was in law enforcement, eventually, I was a law enforcement official in Maryland, and I worked out of the governor's office. And one of the projects that I worked on when I was working with the governor's office, when I was working with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, was protection of infrastructure, such as the Cove Point LNG plant and the Cove Point, what was it, Calvert Cliffs nuclear power plant. And one of the things that I worked on with those was the actual security plans for that. What are you going to do to stop terrorism from attacking it? And having worked with those, one of the things they taught us about was the LNG plants. And of course, the first question is this thing like an atomic bomb? Can you just blow the hell out of everything, right? And what we found out was that's not the case, that LNG is not explosive like that. Worse, what we found out was, let's just say an LNG ship had a fire. The likelihood is that it would just come out, that it would just burn like a torch at worst. Most likely wouldn't burn, but if it burned, it would burn more like a torch. It wouldn't be explosive, because when the gas is taken off, and these are all things you need to know since we're talking about these kind of energy things, when the gas is taken off the ship, it is then mixed with 13% oxygen at these the plants, the processing plants, and then pumped out into pipeline systems to wherever. Now at that point it becomes explosive, but it has to be mixed with the 13% oxygen before it will become explosive. So no, these ships that are sailing around, extremely expensive ships, right? Okay, so I say all that to say this: there are two discussions about energy nowadays with the EU, and it can be very misleading. Because what is the first issue is the actual presence of the energy to do that they need. Are we going to run out in Europe? Or the Europeans say, are we going to run out of energy? Are we going to run out of gas? Right? That's one issue when it comes to the basics: survival, heating your home, heating things of that nature. Right? Do you actually have the gas there? That is the most basic issue. Do you have it? And there's some questions about whether or not they actually have it. But that being said, and how much they had, do they have enough to last through the winter, et cetera? But that's only half of the equation. When it comes to, I'll put it like this. Okay, let's just say you find out tomorrow that Europe has enough gas to last for 10 years, but it costs $1 million a cubic meter, right? Then you might have enough to last for 10 years. But if it's $1 million a cubic meter, you can't afford enough to last for 1 hour, right? So the issue A is, do you actually have the natural gas? But B is, you don't actually have it unless you can afford it. Of what value is it when you have it, right? If we've got diesel fuel, let's say the US we're having some issues with diesel fuel, but let's just say we've got plenty of diesel fuel. Yay, we got enough diesel fuel. Boo, it's $77 a gallon. It doesn't do you much good to have it, because now you've priced everything out of what people can afford. And you have the same, effectively, if I can buy, my house is heated with natural gas. If I can buy, if the natural gas is available and I call my natural gas company and they say, yes, we've got the natural gas, and I say, great, can you deliver it? Yes, we can deliver it to you. How much is it going to cost? We can fill your tanks, Garland, good enough to last you for 2.5 months. Yes, it's going to cost you $500,000. I can't get any delivered. Who's got 500 grand to pay these people, right? For 2.5 months, for 2.5 years, for that matter. Trust me, I don't have $500,000 laying around, which means effectively I don't have the energy. If I can't afford the energy, I don't have it, right? Because there's two issues. Is it there? And can I access it? If I don't have the money to buy it, if I can't afford it, I can't access it. It doesn't matter if it's there or not. Why do I say all of that? Because the discussion about whether or not the U.S. can replace eventually the the natural gas with Russia has it 5-10 years down the line. Eventually, number one, we have to talk about them this year and next year, and they're out. Whether or not they have enough to get through the winter or all freeze to death. But can they afford it? So we get to, certainly with homes, can you afford it in your home? And the answer is probably going to be, for a lot of people, no. How do you get by that? Because they're discussing whether or not people will have it. If they can't afford it, the answer is no. And then you move to industry, because it's critical in industry, not just that you have it, and not even that you can afford it. Let's say an industry has enough money that it can afford it, right? It's like very, very expensive, but this industry needs a lot of natural gas, but the industry can afford it. However, there comes about another issue for an industry, and that is the cost of production, whatever they're making. If it's a business course, you already know what it's going to be. In the US, a business course, they're always going to be making what? Widgets, the infamous widgets. So this company in Germany is producing widgets. The question is the cost of production. How much does it cost them to produce each widget, and how much can they get on the market for each widget? And there are competitors from Russia and China selling widgets, and are their prices competitive? They have to be, otherwise. And if you can make a better widget than Russia and China, and your price is competitive, you maybe can sell your widget because it's better at a little bit more. But what happens when your price is not competitive? And that is based on your manufacturing costs, on your cost of production. Now we get to the real issue here. And that is, regardless of whether or not they have enough gas to make it through the winter and then have nothing afterwards, the cost of gas and the need to conserve gas will create a production cost that will not be competitive for the industries of the EU, which means what? They're going to have to find a way to lower those production costs or go out of business, right? Let's take a look at something. I think it's worth reading. Here's an article. October 5th, 2022. What's attracting European manufacturers to the US markets? Lower energy costs, supply chain issues, and political volatility are some of the issues behind European companies' decisions to open new manufacturing plants in the United States. Lower energy costs. You notice that's the first one? Sure, they said supply chain issues and political volatility, right? But let's start here. Well, let's start at the back. There's political volatility. It's volatile. How'd that happen? Because the United States deliberately instigated a military conflict in Ukraine. Deliberately did it. There's no question about it. If you understand how this happens, if you understand the details here, if you don't understand it, you'll just think that Vladimir Putin is an evil guy. So he woke up on February 24th and said, let's attack Ukraine unprovoked. No reason. That's how wars start. People just wake up and say, hey, let's invade a country. If you are naive enough to believe that and brainwashed enough to believe that, you're probably not watching this video anyway. So you're not listening. But the political volatility there was caused by what? It was caused by the Ukraine crisis, which the US, let's face it, Ukraine is on Russia's border. How'd that happen? The US overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014, installed a rabidly anti-Russian government that is infested with the Nazis, literal people who adhere to the Nazi ideology, who have swastikas all over and they get swastikas tattooed on themselves. The US, sadly, I mean, it's my country. I hate to admit it, but it's a fact. The US actually fomented the Nazi ideology in Ukraine in an attempt to ensure that the country, the nation of Ukraine, was rabidly anti-Russian because they knew the Nazis hated Russia. Okay. So this is where we are. That created political volatility. And now the other issue is, the big issue is lower. They're moving to the US because of lower energy costs, right? How did the energy costs go through the roof? One of the things that's happening is the US is selling. Let's see if we can find this. US selling LNG. Let's do it a little bit differently. We would do this together, can't we? Yes. You. Let's look at here. Look at this article. The US will increase natural gas exports to Europe to replace Russian fuel. right? Biden administration officials are also promising to accelerate the build out of hydrogen and carbon. So, two things. Let's put these together. We've got European manufacturers opening new manufacturing plants in the United States because of lower energy cost. The costs are through the roof because of the actions of the United States. Deliberate actions of the United States ran the cost through the roof. So, what is the US doing? Increasing natural gas exports to Europe to replace Russian fuel. Now, as I said before, the Russian gas was extremely inexpensive. However, the US gas is anywhere from 4 to 10 times more expensive. So the US is basically going to say, stop buying that cheap gas and we're going to sell it to you for an astronomical cost. Let's work together, shall we? EU upset Inflation Reduction Act. We're going to work through this together. Europe says Biden's Inflation Reduction Act isn't fair for the global EV future. What's good for America isn't necessarily good for your friends across the pond. At least that's the central message to an urgent call to action from the EU this week against what it sees as discriminatory tax credits and incentives against European and Asian car makers in the groundbreaking new Inflation Reduction Act. President Biden's flagship act provides tax credits on EVs produced in the US, Canada, and Mexico, all in a move to help make EVs more affordable. It requires electric vehicle batteries, which are mostly now produced with minerals and battery cells imported from China, be made in North America, right? So what's going on here? Europe is upset. Why? Because let's start here. Their manufacturing plants are coming to the United States. The US is selling them liquid natural gas at anywhere from 4 to 10 times the price that they were getting it from Russia. They jacked up the prices. And now the Reduction Inflation Act is going to say buy stuff in the United States or Canada, not from Europe. So if you're a manufacturer and you're making electrical vehicles, right? Let's say you're Volkswagen, where are you going to make them? Your big market is the US. Where are you going to make them? You're going to move your manufacturing plants to the US so you can make them there and sell them in the US, right? You're making batteries. You're going to move your battery plants to the US. Why? Because the US says if our people buy batteries, they got to be made in the US. If they buy these cars, they got to be made in the US. So now Volkswagen, all of these European countries, if they're making them at home, they can't sell them in the US. And that's a gigantic market. So what is the US doing? Number one, they're creating an environment economically where the cost of energy is so high that European companies can't afford to make things there. They can't afford the production. Production cost is too high. So these companies are moving to the US. What else is the Biden administration doing? They're saying if you want to buy stuff, it's got to be made in the US, not in Europe. Put it all together, my dear and dear friends, and what do you have? The United States is de-industrializing Europe and reindustrializing itself. It's obvious. The evidence is there. How can you look at that and not see it? What is that about? I'll make it clear. If you didn't see me on the Duran, I'm going to make this clear. The United States, Biden, Trump said it before, didn't do it. Biden said it. Biden said, we're going to bring back our jobs, right? We're going to bring back industry to the United States. We're going to bring jobs back, industrial jobs, good jobs. Now, where did our industry go? It went to China, it went to Vietnam, it went to places like that. Why? Because the labor is cheaper. So the US, the oligarchs, the people that own these countries, moved their manufacturing plants to China because of lower labor costs so they could make a greater profit, taking away the jobs of Americans. Why is that? Because they think about what I said about Europe, lower production cost. The companies were making plenty of profit, yes, but they wanted even more. So they said if we lower our labor cost, our production cost goes down, we can then sell the goods that were made where it cost us $50 to make this widget before, it now costs us 25. And that difference is what? It's profit. We put it in our pockets. Now, when it comes to Europe, they've now created an environment where if you're Volkswagen, you have two incentives. Number one, the cost of energy is so astronomical that if you make your electric vehicle or whatever it is, or your battery, if you're a company making batteries for electric vehicles, the costs are so high for producing these things because of the cost of energy. Guess what? You're priced out of the market. You make this wonderful electric car, but it's 25% more expensive than everybody else's electric car. You can't sell it simply because the price is not competitive. To break even, you have to sell it at too high for too high a cost. So the US says, and on top of that, what's even worse, you make these expensive electric cars. The cost is astronomical. It's not competitive, and the U.S. has passed a law, the Inflation Reduction Act, that says you can't sell it in the U.S. anyway because it's not made in the U.S. So what do? You come to the Biden administration, you say, I want to move some manufacturing to the US, and they say, come on in. So what happened was when the Biden administration said, we're going to bring jobs back, we're going to reindustrialize, we already know they can't do that from China because they can't match the labor costs for China. They just can't do it. The labor costs are going to be too high here. So labor cost is out. So what do? They go to Europe. This war goes on, right? The cost of, think about the kind of things that the US is pushing. It's saying to the Europeans, we want you to stop buying Russian gas. We want you to stop buying Russian oil, Russian diesel fuel. We want you to stop doing all of those things, right? But is the US doing it? No, it's not. Let's take a look over here. Let me see something. US buying more Russian. Let me just give an example. So as they are pushing for all kind of price caps and all kind of stuff for the poor idiots in Europe, Russia is supplying more oil than ever to America's main route. What is that? Let's see. Saudi Arabia to China. Let's see. Percentage of U.S. oil percentage from Russia highest in decades. Um, let's look. See if we can find anything. I'm searching along. We're doing this together. Give me 1 second. U.S. buying Russian oil. OIL. There we go. Here's one not that long ago, middle of the summer. The U.S. is still importing Russian oil despite the ban. And in the first 100 days of the war, Russia earned 93 billion U.S. You can look around and find it, but what you're going to find is this: those poor bastards in Europe are doing what they're told, right? Oh, we're not going to buy Russian oil, and the U.S. is saying don't buy Russian oil, and the U.S. is still buying Russian oil. Why? Because because it is deliberate. What they're doing is they're raising the costs of energy for the EU. They're making it untenable for EU industry in their home nations, right? And as a result, and might I add, Inflation Reduction Act, they're creating incentives and disincentives, both of which drive Russian industry to the US. So what basically Joe Biden, when he said, I'm going to bring jobs home, here's what he meant. I can't bring them home from China or Bangladesh or Vietnam, can't compete with the labor cost, but I can bring them home from Europe. So what are they doing? It's a setup. The United States government under Joe Biden is simply creating an environment where European industry has to shut down and Europe gets deindustrialized. At the same time, they're setting up a welcoming environment for that same industry. They're setting up incentives for them to come here and disincentives for them not to be here. And so what happens with Volkswagen? You got about Volkswagen. Let me give you an example. Recently, Volkswagen closed down an electrical vehicle plant in England. Where do you think that's going? Right. So the bottom line is this: what all the Biden administration is doing is shutting down industry. They're deindustrializing Europe and reindustrializing the US. Why? Because Europe is a patsy, Europe is a pawn, Europe is a cookie for them to nibble on. As long as it benefited them for Europe to have a fairly reasonable standard of living, that was fine. But now it doesn't benefit them. The US is looking at China and it's saying China is a great industrial power and we're in trouble. We have some commodities, we have some oil and gas and things of that nature, but our industry's gone and we need industry, or China just passes up us by like we were in reverse. How are we going to get industry? They found a way. They figured out a way. And that is you shut down European industry, you make it too expensive for them to operate. You create incentives and disincentives to them to come over here, and you steal all of Europe's industry and jobs. Every bit of it, not some of it. Have you talked to people who've been to Europe lately? They're going around, the bars are closing, the pubs are closing, the local stores are closed. Everything's closing. The US is not trying to steal a little bit of Russia's industry. They're going, excuse me, of the European industry. They're going to strip Europe bare. Now, let me add this. What do you think they're going to do to us with Australia as far as China is concerned? They're going to strip Australia bare. The US empire has vassal states and it's stripping them. And now the Europeans, God bless them. You've seen enough of my videos. I've talked about how impoverished Europe is going to be, an impoverished dystopian hellscape, right? And it's not an accident. And to me, when you look at this stuff, it's so glaringly obvious. Did you see those various um, articles I shared with you? Companies leaving Europe. Let's put them all together. Companies leaving Europe, coming to the US because of lower manufacturing costs, right? Lower fuel cost. We have another one. The European leaders are upset because the Inflation Reduction Act is really the European Industry Theft Act. Says, excuse me, says that if you're going to be selling batteries and electric vehicles in the US, they got to be made in the US or Canada. So that means all of those car industries, they have to move there. And the way of the future, they want to go to these electrical vehicles. They're going to take all of their car industry and move it here. Then you see the US saying, we're going to supply all the liquid natural gas for Europe, which means they're going to sell it at 4 to 10 times the prices. Let's just say 4. People will barely be able to afford it. They won't be able to afford it. How are they going to have jobs? Their industry's all gone. It will be impoverished. It will be just God knows what kind of place Europe is going to be. But look at that. Meanwhile, another article, the U.S. is still importing Russian oil despite the ban. The U.S. is saying now the U.S. wants to do they want to push the Europeans into doing some kind of an oil price cap. And the Russians have already said, if you do any country that does that, we ain't selling oil to. So now the European countries are going to say the oil price cap is done. Qatar, which is one of the largest importers of liquid natural gas and of natural gas in the world, has already said, if you do that, we're cutting you off, Europe. So now they're not going to be getting Russian natural gas. Qatar's going to cut them off. And the Russians have said, if you do this oil price cap ban, we ain't selling to you at that price. So bottom line, you'll get none from us. So as if Europe wasn't bad, what the US is looking at Europe and saying, we can't have Europe. We can't have a dynamic in Europe where some corporations can stay. We can't have a dynamic in Europe where the cost for energy is extremely expensive, but they can still afford it. We've got to yank the rug out from under these people. We have to create an environment where it shuts down all their industry as quickly as possible. Look, the US is trying to compete with China now, not next month, not the month after, not in 2024, 2025, now. So they've got to slam the door on European industry within months. So what's going on? They are not hiding it. The only people that are trying to hide it are the European leaders because that's their job. Their job is to hide from the European people that they're there as representatives of the U.S. empire. They have to create the false narrative. They have to create the illusion that these are democracies and independent sovereign democracies all throughout Europe and that they're there representing their constituents. Well, that's not the truth. As long as they can hold that out, they're going to continue to do it. But they're part of the plan. They're part of the plan. And in the end, they'll be living in some gated communities just south of Miami near the Everglades. They'll be living great. They're getting out of there, friends, getting out of there. And the rest of the Europeans will be home. And you know what they'll have? A blue and yellow flag. They'll be left looking at the blue and yellow flag, asking themselves one day, man, this is all I got left. My home's gone. My industry's gone. Everything I have is gone, but I'm left with the blue and yellow flag. And guess what? At that point, the war will be over and they'll negotiate an end and they'll move on because they don't care at that point. Who cares? They're done away with Europe. They got what they wanted. So there is the U.S. is speeding up the process as quick as they can to shut these industries down. I'm sure they're negotiating with them, saying, "How quick can you get here?" Then they're talking to the Olaf Scholzes and the Baerbocks and the Macrons of the world saying, look, man, we got to get these companies over here. China's moving fast. How quick can you get them shut down? Keep your people. Now, of course, the Europeans are in the streets and the European leaders are saying to them, I don't know how long I can hold out because these people are, we know the plan is for them to starve and freeze and live in a dystopian hellscape, but we got to move quick because I got to hold them off long enough to get this industry out of here and get it back to America. So then I can jump ship and get out of here and leave these people in this, kind of escape from New York-esque kind of environment, right? They're going to, once this thing crashes, man, in Europe, I mean, you may not believe me, but you'll find out the hard way. Baerbock, all of the rest of these people, they're getting out of there. They're getting out of there. Now, what happens? Actually, then there's some other things going on. I do believe that some things will be refloated in Europe, that these same people over in the US will go over and buy everything in Europe, which will be worthless at that point for pennies on the dollar, figuring at some point they'll find a way to refloat it. But that's for the future. That's an investment for them 10, 15 years in the future. They figure that once they pass China and they get China in the rearview mirror, which ain't going to happen, but once they do that, they'll go back and deal with Europe and try to build it back up. By then, they'll have bought everything for pennies on the dollar. And the bottom line, the people there will be living in poverty and squalor. It might not even be worth it. Who really wants a continent that, makes Africa look like the Upper East Side of New York? Africa's poor because the U.S. empire and the colonial empires throughout Europe have been robbing them for centuries. Well, now Europe's going to be even more poor. So who wants that? Not the oligarchs. So that's kind of where we are. And let me add this. So let me connect that to Ukraine. So what's going on in Ukraine now? The U.S. government, you're hearing whisperings of some kind of a negotiated settlement. It's time for diplomacy. It's time for negotiated settlement. Here's the interesting thing about those whisperings. Nobody's whispering them to the Russians. If they really intended, if they really planned on doing negotiations, if they really believed that it was time to negotiations, wouldn't they be saying it in the New York Times and the BBC? Would they be saying it? Oh, have you heard General Milley, Hilly, Billy, Smilly, whoever the hell just recently said in the Washington Post that it's time to negotiate? Would they be saying it? No. They'd be through back channels calling the Russians. The Russians said they ain't called us. Why? Because it's not for Russian consumption. This is bull crap for your consumption. Here's what's going on. The European leaders who are in cahoots with these maggots are saying, hey, man, The people are screaming for diplomacy, and we haven't quite deindustrialized them yet. What can we do to hold them off? And the Biden administration says, I got this covered, bruh. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to start leaking some bull crap about we're working on negotiations, diplomacy, things of that nature. We're going to put that out there, and we'll put some things out there just so the neocons will be happy and say we don't really want to do it. We'll put out mixed and contradictory messages, and before you know it, in the blink of an eye, the people will be calm and they'll say, oh, thank God. I think we're finally going to get some diplomacy. They ain't getting no diplomacy. Now, when will they get some diplomacy? Once the industry's gone. At that point, they'll wake up one day and they'll say, my God, our jobs are all gone. Our lifestyle is now down to the lowest level on earth. We're living like insects, for God's sake, and eating insects, literally. Where our lives are hell. We got, Ukrainian refugees running around with, unthinkable tattoos all over them, pushing a questionable ideology that was quite popular in Germany during the 1930s. We got that going on. We got all of the drugs and the crime and all the terrible things that come with destitution and abject poverty, which will be rampant in Europe, right? You'll be looking around saying how this happened. And at that time, the Biden administration will look at each other. They'll look at Baerbock and they'll look at Rishi Sunak and they'll say to them, ladies and gentlemen, our work is done. It's completed. The last industrial factory, the last corporation, the last company has pulled up and it's here. And at that point, you know what you get? You get the brain drain. You get millionaires and wealthy people who say, my God, I can't live in Europe anymore because it's too crime ridden and dangerous and impoverished, and they leave. And then, of course, you get the doctors and lawyers and people of that nature who have a marketable skill that can make them a good living in the US or wherever the hell, and they leave. And all you got is, and I've said this before, what do you have? You got a giant working class with no work. That is the future for Europe. And at that point, the U.S. comes in with Russia. Yeah, maybe there's some kind of by then the Ukraine has collapsed. The Nazis are running in every which direction. By now they got like arm powered anti-aircraft stuff, and they're shooting down passenger jets at Heathrow Airport. They're attacking any politician that doesn't go their way. They're machine gunning things. By now there's poverty, and all of those weapons that were pumped into Ukraine, they ain't in Ukraine anymore. They're in France, Germany, and England. People are running for their lives. It's going to be a disaster to live in Europe by that time. It's going to be, just one of the hell on earth to live in Europe at that time. Legitimately, and it ain't an accident. It's done intentionally. The U.S. is de-industrializing Europe so they can re-industrialize themselves. They're stealing your stuff. And all I can have to say is this. If you walk around waving a blue, stinking, stupid flag and you let somebody rob you in broad daylight, you ought to be robbed. One of the things I think about it is this. Oftentimes I get back to a great book called The Confidence Game. Why we fall for it every time. Confidence game being a con game, a con artist, right? Think about this. There's a chapter in there that talks about a lie so big that it has to work, right? And they talk about a guy who claimed that he had AIDS in the 80s, and he started this organization to raise money for people who had HIV, right? And people felt sorry for him, and he ended up getting the president's wife, I think it was Barbara Bush, to headline a fundraiser. He did all of this stuff to raise money for HIV. What a great gentleman. What a fantastic fella. He didn't have HIV. It was all a lie. He did it for the money, right? They talk about another guy who did something similar with cancer, right? So why did the scam work? Because who the hell would ever think that somebody would tell a lie that big and that obvious, right? Sometimes a lie works because it's so big and so obvious, so much in broad daylight that nobody thinks that anybody would ever do it. It's like, who in the hell would ever run around and say, I got HIV, right? So you're like, some guy says, I got HIV. You're like, well, he's got to have it because for God's sake, he ain't going to say it. He's not going to like go around the world saying he's got HIV just to raise money if he doesn't have it. Yeah, that's exactly what he did because he knew as a con artist that the bigger the lie, the more likely it was to work because nobody would believe somebody was that crazy. Oh, I've got cancer. I got to raise money for cancer. Oh, you poor gentleman. He's never been diagnosed with cancer, right? That's what we're looking at. The US, right in front of Europe's eyes. They're like, yeah, guys, we're going to have a war going on your continent. It's going to cause your life to go to hell. And we're going to steal all your industry. And the Europeans are like, yeah, we hate Putin. We're with you. I'm sitting here, and a lot of reasonable people are like looking at the Europeans like, really, guys? You right in front of your eyes, you're going to let them do that? And they're like, oh, you're a Putin loving Russian bot. The reason I know because I went on Twitter and all these guys call themselves fellas nafos or something like that, and they got these stupid looking dogs or something in their by their name, and therefore I'm with them, and we hate Putin, and ha 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 ha, and I'm like, okay. All right, then. I will be going on my merry way. I live in the United States. Sadly, I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud that the people who run my government are common street thugs, hoods, and gangsters, criminals, and pirates. I mean, that's what they are, if we're honest about it. This is not a luxury liner that I'm sitting on, my friends. It's the Jolly Roger. This is a pirate ship. And I understand that Joe Biden is a common street thug. Now, look, it's the Haitians. The government of Haiti, the president of Haiti, his name was Jovenel Moise, he was working for the U.S. and then he decided he wanted to meet with the Venezuelans. He wanted to meet with be friends with the Russians and the Chinese. And what do you know? One night he was asleep in the bed with his wife, and his presidential guards somehow wandered away. One may even think that they were paid. Meanwhile, a bunch of ugly guys came in with machine guns and filled his ass full of holes. And now, a couple of the assassins, the US went in and grabbed a couple of the assassins and brought them home. And then filed papers in court. The FBI recently filed papers in court that said these guys were associated with the FBI, and we want anything to do with these guys being associated with the FBI. We want to make sure that that's sealed forever, so that you can't find out that the assassins that Joe Biden had machine gun the president of Haiti was working for him. They were FBI. They were. This was an intelligence operation. So I'm telling you, that's easy to find. You can go on online and research this stuff very quickly yourself. Research it. The US put lead in his ass. Done. These are common. So do you think if the Biden administration would not send a bunch of killers to this guy's house and machine gun him and his wife? She survived, but she got hit with machine gun fire too. Do you think for 1 second that some common street thugs like Biden and Blinken and these crooked criminal gangsters would do that? You think they wouldn't steal your industry, guys? Really? So Europe will be left. But I will say this, when you wander around Europe, 5 years from now, well, 1 year from now, sadly, and there's no industry and the streets are filthy and they have no jobs, and it's going to look like San Francisco. There'll be people pooping on the street, homeless, tents, shanty towns everywhere. I mean, it's going to be a disaster. And one of the things you're going to see, the trains will still be painted blue and yellow. They'll still have like blue and yellow murals around. They'll be like blue. You know how like you go somewhere and there's like on a beach and there's still like masks from the whole COVID thing, those little surgical masks littering everything with dirt and trash, kind of reminding us of the whole COVID thing. Guess what? You're going to go to Europe and there'll be blue and yellow crap. They won't be painting anything blue and yellow anymore. They won't be giving out flags anymore. None of that stuff. They won't be giving special things for the Ukrainian refugees because that scam will have run out. They won't need that scam anymore. In fact, once they get your industry, it's the end of the scam. Nothing else. If you're going to say, "Hey, can I get a blue and yellow flag? I support Ukraine, Slava Ukraina," and they're going to say, "Where? No, yeah, we'll sell it to you for 10 times the cost it is to make it, you idiot." They're going to say, "Don't you realize that was a scam and we have no use for blue and yellow shit anymore?" So, no, we got nothing blue and yellow. If it's blue and yellow, enjoy it. That's the best we can do. See ya. And they're out. And I don't know what else to say. That's it. That's it. That's how it's going to work. All right, let's take a look and see. And Sparky says leaders no longer care if they get caught. Exactly. You know what? You are on the money. Why should they? If you think about it, why should they care? If you got a bunch of idiots running around with blue and yellow flags begging to be fleeced like sheep, why would you care? They ain't going to do nothing. They're going to clap and say thank you. They have so brainwashed the people of Europe. You don't need, here's the thing about it, that con, you don't even need to con them anymore. They're conning themselves. That's the easiest in the world. Metho Nelson says, "I'm late, but I'm hearing that some of the Ukrainian aid funds were sent over to the FTX platform. That platform has since gone belly up." The Ukrainian aid funds were scammed into the offshore accounts of oligarchs. That's what they were. You remember a few years ago, look at Haiti. A few years ago, there was an earthquake in Haiti, like 25,000 people died. The Clintons went over, excuse me, the Red Cross, all these NGOs went over and raised like $2 billion. And hey, that's a lot of money. They kept it. They built like 6 houses with like $2 billion, right? That was Haiti aid, Haitian aid. No, it wasn't. It was a scam. It was all a scam. And the same way as that, you know what? I bet it didn't go to that's a good question that you said, Metho Nelson. I bet it didn't go to the FTX platform. It's gone into their accounts. And you know what they're going to say? Okay, here's the thing. How do you get away with it better? Hey, Garland, where's that $100 million that you were in charge of for Ukraine aid? Would you believe the FTX platform? Okay, good enough. You're done. Yeah, I meant well, and I invested in the FTX platform, but it got lost. Okay. Or what sounds better? What sounds better? That, right? Okay, yeah, FTX platform, it's all gone. Or this. Hey, Garland, where's that $100 million that you were in Ukraine aid that you're responsible for? I put it in shell companies in Cyprus and stole every dime of it. So now, guess what? They got a ready-made lie. It's like, come on, do you really believe that there's $500 hammers at the Pentagon? People used to say that. Do you believe the Pentagon pays $500 for hammers? No, they do not. They write down on the balance sheet that they paid $500 for hammers, and the money is scammed into the accounts of oligarchs. It's a fraud. And if you're stupid enough to believe that they're paying $500 for hammers, then you ought to be scammed. And likewise, look, isn't that convenient? All this Ukraine aid came in, and people are afraid that somebody might start asking questions. The Republicans may take power in the House, and they may start saying, "We want to do an audit and see where the money went." Right? They can't say it went in their pockets. So boom, where'd the money go? Where'd all that money we sent go over? Would you believe we invested in the FTX platform? And if you're stupid enough to, no, I wouldn't believe that. Here's $1 million. Well, it's getting a little clearer. Here's another $1 million. I believe it. Because it's all a fraud and a scam. So yes, the FTX platform will be another scam so they can find a way to explain where $100 billion went. And it went into the pockets of billionaires just like it always does. All right, thanks a lot. Next, Sparky says, Soylent Green is people. Nerdtopia is dystopia. 2022. And my friends in Europe, you better learn how to eat Soylent Green. Sparky, Nixon is through in 72. Nixon door 24. Thanks a lot, Sparky. I like that. All right, let's go. Next. Richard Adams says, I do not trust our election process. That being said, I feel you hit the nail on the head when you said there were lukewarm election results because there's no material difference between the two parties. Absolutely. 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. Thank you very much. Let's see what we got. Any more? Anyone? Oh, and here we have post post hegemony says, "You're doing God's work, Mr. Nixon. Never surrender." Thank you very much. Somebody tried to go after me the other day because of my radio, my one of my radio shows. I've got multiple radio shows, but one of my radio shows in Washington D.C. and I had Dan Cohen on. We were talking about Haiti, and we were laughing about Vladimir Zelensky saying, here you got a Jewish guy, and they're using him as a human shield. Because why? Because they got literal Nazis, and they have a Jewish leader, and then they can say, hey, look, we couldn't have Nazis because there's a Jewish leader. And somebody was on Twitter like, Garland's being anti-Semitic, and I'm like, so you are supporting literal Nazis, and I'm the one that's anti-Semitic for saying you shouldn't support literal Nazis. How hilarious is that? Of course, I did what I do on Twitter all the time. I blocked that maggot. All right. So let's go to the bottom and see, did I miss any? No, I did not. We're going over to Rockfin, and we're answering anything we got from Rockfin. Okay. JVB says, pure pure beauty, Garland. Most of the stuff I watch, they don't interact until the end. Many do a separate Q&A. Thank you very much. Yeah, Sparky is great. You're right. Our government has been acting like a thug for decades, and the comeuppance will be coming soon. What else? All right. People are talking about the chat and interactions and stuff like that. Oh, well, I might miss something. I don't know. But thanks, JVB. Certainly appreciate it. JVB for doing the a tip in Rockfin. All right, guys. Well, it's Saturday night here in by the beautiful Chesapeake Bay in Pasadena, Maryland. And Garland Nixon is tired because I ain't the wokest guy in the world. So you know what I was doing today? I had a wood splitter, and my next door neighbor had this gigantic oak tree that she had cut down, and she was going to have it hauled away. And I said, no, 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 no. You don't want to do that. Have it all sliced up and just tell the tree company to drop it there, and I will come over. And so I was over there with my wood splitter, splitting and stacking wood with my buddy Wayne and with my sister's uh, grandson or something like that, my great nephew. And so I was splitting wood and stacking wood, manly kind of stuff. I like doing that kind of stuff. I got chainsaw, but I didn't use my chainsaw today. I just used the wood splitter. It was all split up, and I enjoyed that. And I am so tired, I can barely move. So thanks a lot, everybody. Had a great time, and I hope I really enjoyed. Man, you know what? I really love doing the Duran. Oh crap! What am I doing? I left all my banners out. Yikes! I really enjoyed doing the Duran. Because those guys are my favorite, and they're brilliant, and they're a lot of fun, and they ask good questions, and they've got a great following. So thank you, everyone. Don't forget, like I say always, anyone who can help the channel, it is greatly appreciated. Anyone, certainly, we've got, as you can see, there's Cash App. My Cash App info is scrolling across the screen. Make sure you join my Rockfin page, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. In case they throw my ass off of Twitter, Rockfin is still going to be there. And go to Rockfin as much as you can. Anyway, it's a free speech platform. And so, as I always say, you can join Rockfin. You can be a member. I mean, you can join, my Rockfin, follow me there. You can watch all my stuff there. I do one premium show per week, but you can be a member for $9.99 a month. And if you join for the year, then they will give you 2 months free, I think it is. But Rockfin's great because they don't do advertising, but they have members, and that's what keeps it going with no advertising, and that makes the channel strong. So anybody, if you really want to help me out, go to Rockfin and become a member, a subscriber. I think it is at $9.99 a month per year. They give you 2 free. So that's a great help. But of course, I got Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, all the other stuff scrolls across the screen. Whatever you can do, I appreciate it. However, if you don't have the money, don't worry about it. If you don't have the money, for those of you who don't, because you know what, I have a lot of friends here who do, and they will step in and they will do what they can to help keep the channel going. So those of you who can't, don't worry about it. Just enjoy the channel as best you can. If you can, share it. If you can't afford it, don't worry about it, man. And guys and girls, just enjoy the channel and share it on all your social media platforms. I would certainly appreciate that. And as Alex Christoforus always says, smash the old like button. Thanks a lot, all. What did I miss? Oh, I missed some people. Sparky says, compliment your Duran performance. You missed it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sparky. I certainly appreciate that. Sparky's always around, doing good. You're doing God's work, Sparky, as they say. Mid 199 for MS. Thank you, MS. And I got to go back over because I had somebody else on Rockfin, and we don't want to miss our dear friends on Rockfin. Laura Baza said, I felt dupes again, Garland. I went and voted blue because they kept saying red wave, red wave, red wave, no red wave, not even. Well, look, Laura, every 2 years when it's time to vote, they're going to say something. You felt duped again because you were duped again. It's Lucy in the football every time. You've got to, this time, there's a reason. This is the most important vote of a lifetime because Trumpity Trump or something, right? Hey, but you know what? I'm not mad at you because do whatever it is you have to do. You're going to feel bad if you get taken for a ride by these schnooks again, but don't feel bad because hey, I was a Democrat for many, 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 many years, most of my life. And then when the whole Bernie situation came, I walked out the door. So don't feel bad. We have to learn sooner or later. It took me longer. I've talked to friends who said, are you kidding me? I stopped voting for these idiots back in the 90s, right? I've started voting for Ross Perot back in 92. I've heard people say things like that. So you don't feel bad. It takes some of us a little longer than others to learn. And I was one of them. So when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Thanks a lot, you all. Certainly appreciate you. Appreciate everybody. Don't forget, share this on all your platforms. Smash that like button and go over to rockfin.com and become a member if you can. That's cost free. But if you can, do the $9.99 a month, 2 months free for joining for a year to help keep that Rockfin free speech platform up. That is highly appreciated. Peace. I'm out.